deliberately humiliating me on the international stage right before my US state visit. There will be absolutely no leniency and certainly no summer invitation. The penny has miraculously dropped for King Charles III, who appears to have finally grasped that negotiating with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle is a spectacular exercise in futility. The sheer delusion that an ongoing relationship with the transatlantic exiles could yield anything positive has been thoroughly obliterated. Reports from media observers confirm that the monarch has brutally severed the Sussexes from the summer guest list at Sandringham. This glorious excommunication is the direct fallout from what has been mercilessly branded the Australia Trauma Tour. Onlookers were previously nauseated watching palace courtiers leak pathetic, spineless briefs to the press, desperately claiming the wayward couple would face no punishment or loss of titles. The sovereign was ultimately forced to act, as the unending humiliation orchestrated by the duo became impossible to ignore. They have weaponized their embarrassment, dragging the royal dignity through the mud across Ukraine, Washington, D.C., and the lawless wasteland of the internet. While the royal family has somehow navigated this grotesque pantomime relatively unscathed, Prince William's stark warnings about the persistent Sussex threat have proven fatally accurate. The permanent withdrawal of the Sandringham olive branch serves as a spectacular victory for palace preservation. I'm told by another friend of the King that Charles won't invite them, especially not after their trip to Australia. The Duke of Sussex, a man who peddles anti-bullying rhetoric like cheap merchandise, is ironically perceived as the ultimate tyrant within the palace walls. Whenever he is denied his royal pacifier, the prince throws a spectacular toddler-esque tantrum, shamelessly deploying his own offspring, Archie and Lilibet, as pawns for emotional extortion. Rolling out the red carpet was already a catastrophic idea, particularly after the spectacular defamation lawsuit filed by Centre Ballet's chairwoman, Sophie Chandauka. However, the catastrophic Australian tour was the final nail in the coffin, ensuring that extending an invitation to Sandringham would merely paint the sovereign as a tragic, spineless figure. Harry and Meghan will come, but it won't be at the King's invitation, my source said adamantly. The very notion of King Charles accommodating his relentless tormentors would have been utterly indigestible for the British public. The concept of a genuine invitation was nothing more than a strategic media fabrication orchestrated by the prince himself. Naturally, we would graciously lower ourselves to entertain the vague concept of a Sandringham summons, assuming the red carpet is thick enough. This pathetic public grovelling was a transparent bid to secure state-funded security, safeguarding whatever dwindling pennies remain in his Californian piggy bank. The emotional blackmail reached nauseating heights as he dangled the prospect of familial reunion, heavily caveated by an obsessive need to vet the guest list to avoid Prince William and Catherine. The palace initially countered with a thinly veiled statement of polite despair, suggesting the monarch might somehow endure a viewing of his transatlantic descendants. His Majesty maintains a desperate, tragically optimistic desire to behold the grandchildren who are currently being used as diplomatic hostages. In reality, the King has allegedly met Lilibet perhaps half a time, while his encounters with Archie number barely a handful. Following the Australian disaster, allowing the Duchess to parade through the palace merely to monetize her wardrobe on some discount fashion blog is a grotesque impossibility. Reducing the ancient monarchy to a tacky, clickbait styling guide for surviving the dreaded stepmother is an obscenity the Crown simply will not tolerate. The world is painfully aware that the Sussexes' social currency has spectacularly flatlined across both sides of the Atlantic. To resurrect their dead brand, they desperately need to rub themselves in royal glitter to trick the public into believing they are relevant again. However, readmitting them is a suicidal gamble, as any microscopic slight could trigger another catastrophic television special, a tearful gossip session, or yet another ghostly memoir. Fencing their trauma closet for quick cash is utterly repulsive, rendering them far too toxic to cross the threshold. The Duke has already catastrophically failed the diplomatic test surrounding the upcoming US state visit. Any individual with a functioning brain cell might have managed to remain silent for a mere 7 days. Instead, he launched a venomous attack on Donald Trump and the American administration in Ukraine, a spectacular geopolitical grenade thrown nearly a week before King Charles was due in Washington, D.C. This impeccably timed sabotage is viewed as the ultimate, unforgivable slight against his reigning father. His public theatrics contradict his vicious actions, exposing a deeply disturbing psychological complex regarding the sovereign. I am just terribly crippled by anxiety that my poor father might expire before apologizing to me, ensuring my tragedy remains the absolute center of the universe. Despite these hollow tears, he intentionally amplifies the agony of a monarch who has paused brutal cancer treatments to endure a punishing transatlantic itinerary. Dragging an ailing body through Washington, D.C., New York, Virginia, and ultimately Bermuda without Queen Camilla is a monumental ordeal. The absolute last thing the king required was a fresh, steaming pile of manufactured Sussex stress. Prince William's diagnosis remains piercingly accurate. The anxiety imported by his brother is a literal health hazard for a cancer patient. One can only imagine the suffocating dread echoing through the halls of Balmoral when the king was handed the transcript of his son's rogue Ukrainian escapade. Good heavens, why must my own flesh and blood continuously weaponize artificial intelligence to hurl geopolitical hand grenades into my medicinal peace? This is the damning portrait of a son who does not possess a single shred of genuine concern for his ailing father. 100%. But I also wonder if Harry would have gone to Ukraine if Australia had gone better. Good point. Australia, the trip was a disaster. He had to move the narrative. Polls, the post-Australia polls were horrific, and I think he just needs to be in the public eye. I think he's incredibly self-centred. And the one thing that the king and the palace have always said to him is stop talking to the press. The prince's default mechanism for handling rejection is to unleash a media firestorm. Since my dear papa refuses to indulge my endless grievances on the telephone, I shall simply vomit my victimhood directly onto the front pages of whichever tabloid will still take my calls. The institution saw right through this grotesque manoeuvring, issuing a sharp, exasperated reprimand. Cease broadcasting your pathetic demands to the world. This transparent extortion will not crack the palace walls. Beneath their endless, sanctimonious drivel about being victims of institutional cruelty, the Sussexes are widely acknowledged as the ultimate predators. The infamous incident involving their Chief of Staff, Sarah Fosmo, perfectly encapsulates the Duchess's terrifying dual nature. Caught on camera, the former actress delivered a glacial death stare, sharp enough to decapitate. Survivors of the Montecito regime know that a public glare is merely an appetizer for the psychological skinning that occurs behind closed doors. The mere sight of that televised micro-expression was enough to trigger severe PTSD flashbacks among traumatised ex-employees. Crazy video clip of Meghan giving a staffer a very dirty look, and former staffers have exclusively told me it gives me PTSD. It's classic Meghan. Literally a workplace psychopath, smiling to the public on one side of her face and glowering at you on the secret side. The woman treats anyone she has power over as totally disposable. You are just treated like a tradesman who is there to fix the toilet. The supreme irony is that treating a plumber with dignity is basic self-preservation. a fundamental concept of human decency the Duchess completely missed. If you consistently treat your entourage like disposable rubbish, your empire will eventually implode from the inside out. It mirrors the ancient dating advice dispensed a solid millennium ago. Never trust someone who tortures the waiting staff, for you will inevitably be their next victim. Never date a man who's mean to the waiters, because that's exactly how he's going to end up treating you. It is a mathematical certainty that Sarah has not emerged from the Montecito meat grinder without permanent psychological scars. The ticking clock on her resignation is deafening. As for the rogue prince, he has enthusiastically made his utterly miserable bed, and now he is forced to lie in the suffocating ruins of his own grand design. The intricate web of media complicity surrounding the Duke and Duchess of Sussex is spectacularly unravelling. Observers note the deliciously ironic career trajectory of a certain former editorial maestro behind People magazine. This was the very man who orchestrated that notoriously saccharine cover featuring the Duchess's supposedly devoted friends, peddling a fictional narrative of her absolute loveliness while simultaneously publishing her private, deeply weaponized letter to her father. His subsequent crusade to transform US Weekly into a dedicated propaganda pamphlet for the Montecito royals ended in an absolute bloodbath. The public violently rejected the manufactured nonsense, prompting a catastrophic corporate reckoning that saw a devastating 60% of the workforce purged overnight. Now operating as a born-again, independent truth-teller, the journalist has miraculously discovered his moral compass. Following a grueling 4-week investigative deep dive into the Sussexes' murky reality, he has boldly concluded that their gilded Californian empire is utterly crumbling. In a bizarre juxtaposition, the broadcast of this royal tragedy is briefly derailed by a surreal promotional tangent about a flavoured air device, desperately attempting to assist 750,000 individuals in breaking their nicotine addictions. The narrator seamlessly transitions from royal ruin to pitching twisty, fidget-friendly tools, practically begging listeners to use a promotional code before returning to the transatlantic circus. Returning to the financial bloodbath, the latest independent exposé shreds the couple's PR fairy tales to absolute ribbons. That mythical, headline-grabbing $120 million Netflix illusion was apparently nothing but Hollywood smoke and mirrors. Similarly, the phantom $30 million Spotify check was equally fictitious. Insiders ruthlessly whisper that Princess Diana's inheritance has largely evaporated into the Californian smog. The royal exiles are reportedly drowning under a staggering vortex of outgoings, grappling with multiple mortgages, astronomical security invoices, and legal bills ballooning to a dizzying $40 million. Their highly publicised television ventures are practically dead on arrival. The script for the highly anticipated polo drama will allegedly never see the light of day. Industry veterans sneer that slapping the Sussex brand onto a production is no longer a golden ticket, but rather a guaranteed commercial curse. Behind the iron gates of their mansion, the personal reality is painted as a Dickensian nightmare of wild unhappiness. Sources describe a household plagued by severe staff hemorrhaging and 2 fiercely ambitious individuals whose life goals have diverged so violently that any reconciliation is deemed utterly impossible. The universally prescribed antidote to their toxic public image is a period of absolute silence and disappearance, a strategy their monstrous egos will instinctively reject. Veteran royal commentators watch this sudden burst of journalistic honesty with a mixture of bitter amusement and profound resentment. It is intensely grating to watch mainstream editors spend years monetizing blatant falsehoods on behalf of the Sussexes, only to pivot to truth-telling for independent clicks once the corporate safety net vanishes. There is a lingering demand for these born-again truth-tellers to publicly confess that their previous sycophancy was driven entirely by commercial pressure and access journalism. This brand of cowardly reporting simply involved picking up the telephone and blindly swallowing whatever PR drivel the couple regurgitated, completely disregarding the independent journalists who were putting their careers on the line. The vindication for these ostracised reporters is sweet, but painfully delayed. Consider the case of Charlotte Griffiths, who endured absolute legal hell before leaked messages finally proved her explosive reporting about an intimate relationship was dead accurate. Similarly, reporters who spent a decade locked in a bitter war of attrition with the Sussex denial machine are finally watching their so-called conspiracy theories become historical fact. The ultimate validation arrived courtesy of Hugo Vickers, a trusted confidant of the late Queen Elizabeth II. He recently confirmed the late monarch's terrifying suspicion that the rogue Duke and his wife were secretly wired during private family gatherings, allegedly attempting to record material for their commercial ventures. When this exact nightmare scenario was first reported during the media bloodbath of 2021, the journalists responsible were crucified as deranged lunatics. This was despite the existence of solid internal sources and glaring pictorial evidence showing the couple suspiciously bulked up with hidden recording equipment. Today, the Sussexes' media stronghold has withered into a pathetic shadow of its former self. Their remaining allies in the American mainstream press are strictly limited to the sycophantic pages of Town and Country, People, and Vanity Fair, aggressively spoon-fed by the operatives at Sunshine Sachs. Occasional suspicious Instagram accounts pop up to praise their sartorial choices, but the wider public is no longer buying the cheap illusion. Independent commentators, having survived the relentless gaslighting, are now marching towards an audience of 750,000 subscribers, proving that the brutal, unfiltered truth is infinitely more lucrative than palace-approved fiction. The digital battlefield of royal commentary is a ruthlessly Darwinian arena where survival depends entirely on the relentless monetization of aristocratic misery. Having successfully eviscerated the transatlantic exiles, the independent pundits seamlessly transition into the aggressive choreography of digital street hustling. They are furiously chasing the holy grail of algorithmic dominance, desperately herding their audience toward that monumental milestone of 750,000 loyal subscribers. It is a fiercely competitive ecosystem where the blood of the mainstream media is used to fertilize independent empires. That's because over 50% of you watching this video haven't done that yet, and it is the best way to support Outspoken. We're totally independent, by the way. No big tech backing, no billionaires pulling the strings, and if you turn on the bell, you'll get alerted to all our new videos. This aggressive solicitation is wrapped in a thick, self-congratulatory blanket of righteous vindication. For a grueling decade, these rogue commentators were treated as the lunatic fringe, aggressively gaslit by the well-oiled Sussex propaganda machine and deliberately ignored by the elite press. Now, they sit upon a towering mountain of verified truths, practically bathing in the sweet, intoxicating nectar of saying, "I told you so." It is very fascinating. And you know what? I do want to agree with you. I absolutely am excited for Dan Wootton to keep coming out with the truth and to keep breaking stories and, possibly even giving those of us who have broken them first some sort of a, hey, good job. The schadenfreude is utterly palpable as they watch former glossy magazine editors desperately scramble to align themselves with the undeniable reality of the royal implosion. Yeah, indeed. Indeed. I mean, look, it is a crowded market, but I think the thing is people understand the truth. People understand the people who have been telling the truth for a long period of time, as you have, as I have, and that does matter. It does make a difference. The narrative then violently pivots from the petty squabbles of digital journalism to the grand crumbling theatre of the British monarchy itself. The spotlight is ruthlessly directed toward King Charles III, whose recent, highly orchestrated national broadcast from the shadowy depths of the Balmoral Library has sparked a firestorm of analytical panic. Well, I wanted to speak to you about King Charles's address to the nation this week because observers note that the mainstream press suspiciously buried the sheer psychological magnitude of this televised address, perhaps too cowardly to dissect its lethal undertones. I actually think it was really undercovered. I was surprised, actually, that more was not made of this, because this was a king, in my view, Paula, who was hitting back at some of his critics. And I think I'm probably in that camp, and Tom Zeitz is probably in that camp, saying that he should consider abdication. The king is currently navigating a sovereign minefield, flanked by the grotesque, unrelenting humiliation of his disgraced brother Andrew on one side, and the terrifying, exhausting reality of his own medical vulnerability on the other. A growing chorus of restless critics has been loudly whispering that the ageing monarch should gracefully hurl his crown into the nearest Scottish loch and retire to a life of quiet horticultural eccentricities. Instead, Charles engineered this pre-recorded spectacle as a polite but absolute declaration of war against any treasonous whispers of early retirement. His televised pledge was not a comforting balm for a troubled nation, but rather a white-knuckled grip on the velvet-lined steering wheel of a careening dynastic bus. My darling, departed mother would likely have been entirely mortified by the catastrophic circus we currently find ourselves surviving, but I shall ruthlessly cling to her delusion that things will magically sort themselves out before the empire collapses. Therefore, I am stubbornly cementing my royal posterior to this throne, renewing my solemn threat to serve you all until the bitter, breathless end. Cheers to you, Mama. Your ghost will forever haunt our PR strategies. Delivering this style of broadcast outside the legally mandated Christmas waffling is a blaring neon sign of internal palace panic, marking only the third time such a desperate PR missile has been launched. It was the ultimate aristocratic refusal, delivered directly into the living rooms of his detractors, proving that he intends to occupy the throne until the absolute final curtain drops. Yet, the independent commentators remain fiercely unsympathetic to his mere survival tactics, demanding a level of sovereign brutality that Charles seems genetically incapable of executing. And I don't blame him, actually. I don't know if he should. What would be nice is if he would be a stronger king. They demand he stop hiding behind his mother's legacy of passive-aggressive endurance and start wielding the scepter like a proper executioner's axe. The ultimate masterclass in dynastic preservation was recently delivered by the Queen of Denmark, who executed a magnificent, bloodless coup against her own flesh and blood, and do as his mother did, which is always protect the crown. And by protecting the crown, sometimes you've got to trim the fat. He needs to pull, I believe it was the Queen of Denmark, who basically one day woke up and said, okay, nobody has titles anymore except for my oldest son and his children. And it came as a shock to the rest of the family. But she said, no, this is going to make your lives better. Please trust and believe. The kids do know, the kids' noses were out of joint for a hot minute, but they are family, so they came back together. And that, I think, is what King Charles needs to do. Just, bite the bullet. This Danish monarch did not waste a single breath on leaky palace briefs or emotional hand-wringing over her minor relatives' fragile egos. She simply detonated their royal privileges overnight, practically telling them to check their immense entitlement at the door and seek genuine employment. It was a spectacular surgical strike that instantly neutralized any future transatlantic podcasts or whiny, ghost-written autobiographies from the Danish reserves. Meanwhile, the British sovereign remains trapped in a perpetual cycle of appeasement, utterly terrified of actually trimming the aristocratic fat that is slowly suffocating the institution. The sheer hypocrisy of allowing rogue royals to parade their hollow titles across global disaster zones, while the king preaches about steadfast duty, is a comedy of errors the public is increasingly unwilling to stomach. The monarchy is currently operating like a majestic, sinking galleon, overflowing with disgraced uncles, rogue princes, and a terrifying assortment of utterly useless hangers-on. Yeah, totally. The problem is, Paula, it's very difficult, isn't it, to be properly committed to such a big role when you are undergoing utterly brutal treatment. The commentators acknowledge, with a brief, fleeting moment of human decency, that running a millennium-old firm while actively battling a life-threatening illness is a Herculean nightmare on a weekly basis. I feel for him. The absolute absurdity of pausing a grueling cancer protocol just to wave at American politicians and dodge the catastrophic PR landmines planted by his youngest son is a Shakespearean tragedy wrapped in a cheap tabloid farce. I think he's up for it. I look at this. He has gone through brutal treatment. He's having a horrible time with cancer. He has been the most active king we have seen in years. True, or, well, he was, He is practically daring the Grim Reaper to a staring contest, transforming his immense physical pain into a weaponized display of hyper-visibility just to prove his cynical critics wrong. The upcoming high-stakes American tour is set to be an absolute gladiator match where every limp, sigh, or momentary flicker of fatigue will be forensically dissected by the global press. True, no. And we're going to see it next week. We are going to see it next week, and it is going to be fascinating. As the grim discussion of mortality and dynastic decay naturally concludes, the commentators ruthlessly pivot back to the highly lucrative business of self-promotion. They aggressively plug their newly rebranded, supposedly uncensored newsletters, mocking the pathetic imitations who dare to claim the exact same level of intellectual savagery. The promise of exclusive ad-free content acts as the final digital carrot, dangling the intoxicating prospect of unfiltered royal destruction behind a strict monthly paywall. This is no longer merely journalism. It has devolved into an ideological war of attrition. The battle to secure those elusive 750,000 subscribers is a daily blood sport against the algorithm and the remaining desperate sycophants still clinging to the shattered Montecito myth. The ultimate, bitter irony is that while the king frantically fights to maintain the dignity of a rapidly crumbling empire, these independent operatives have constructed an impenetrable, highly profitable fortress entirely out of the monarchy's spectacular ruins,